everyone, this is Boricua Banks and welcome back to Let's Play Seduce Me to the Demon War. In the last episode, we had a choice to make. We were offered training to prepare for the war, and we had a lot of options. We had all the new characters that work with Diana, and then we also had Diana herself, and I was so tempted. But in the end, I went with the cool ninja guy, Shadow, because he has like shadow ninjutsu and all that. So he's pretty interesting so far. We also had a funny little scene where we interacted with a certain anatomy part of Diana, and she had an interesting reaction. So that was fun. But let's continue on now. How did I do all of that?
Curious, are you?
Well, yeah, I am your student after all. I want to know. As we walked back to the library, Shadow looked to me and gave a slight smirk.
You are quite interesting for a human.
I felt a bit flattered and ran my hand behind my neck, bearing a shy smile. I had to admit, I was acting like a little girl who had just learned about candy. Still, I had very good reason. I did something I never imagined I could do. It was well worth the excitement. Shadow shook his head and let out a sigh.
While it is impossible for us to touch anyone in the shadow plane, let alone assassinate them, it is very possible to distract them or affect the light sources of the world.
Like how I did?
Indeed. A shadow is more than just a reaction to light. It is also a part of a person's being, able to be used to, let's just say, get a message across.
Oh, we got a message across, all right. Yeah. So, I can't kill anyone from the shadow plane.
No, but you can very easily make them feel as if they aren't alone, putting them on alert and giving you a good chance to kill them while they're distracted.
I took a moment to take in what he meant. I could see how manipulating the shadows were a great benefit in battle. However, apparently I had a time limit for how long I could be in the shadows. At least it wasn't entirely overpowered. The remainder of the day became focused on me manipulating light and shadow in the library. While being in the shadow plane was fun, it was only effective if the targets of my movements were either sources of light or had distinct shadows of their own. At the end of the day, I was exhausted. Who knew that using dark magic would be so difficult? Still, I guessed that I had potential, or else I wouldn't have succeeded in passing the tests Shadow threw at me. I had to be proud of that much. I slumped and fell onto the ground, exhausted. I definitely used up a lot of energy, and it was a foreign feeling to me as a human. It was like my body became heavier with each breath I took, but it wasn't entirely painful. A small huff caused me to look over at Shadow, seeing him stare at me intensely with crossed arms. What?
For a human, you have a large amount of energy. I'm surprised you're not a witch.
I felt a little bolstered by the statement, despite how strangely it was phrased. I guessed Shadow really couldn't genuinely compliment anyone. I wondered why. I had much to learn, but was excited for the next day as my training ended and I was sent to my room. I returned to my room that night, wondering how things had come to this. My body was exhausted, but my mind was running 100 miles an hour. I had to physically be near the Demon Lord while he died? How specific was this curse? As I sat on the bed, I ran my hands through my hair and over my face, attempting to ease the nerves beneath my skin. Despite it not working as well as I'd hoped, I found my mind organizing my thoughts constructively. I was training for a reason, after all. I was working to make sure I survived this war, and was able to go home with James, the man I loved. However, just thinking about him brought back memories of Cero screaming and Diana crying. Was it really James's fault that Diana's family was killed? All James wanted was freedom. Why are you always shirtless, bruh? I mean, not that I mind per se, but it's a little strange. As I thought of him, James entered the room and spotted me, a tired smile growing on his face. I smiled back, matching his exhaustion.
You look worn out.
So do you. James chuckled slightly and walked over, sitting beside me. I felt myself instinctively scoot closer to his body and lay my head on his shoulder. That simple move made my body almost sink into his. When did James ever feel this warm? James's arm wrapped around my waist and pulled me closer. As he placed a kiss on my head, I could only hum happily.
So, about sleeping tonight.
I looked up to James, wondering where the question came from. It was random, and I didn't understand what he meant until I stretched back into my thoughts. The angels. James nodded. He was right. How was I supposed to sleep when angels were after me? They could reach into my dreams and remove my memories without me being able to fight back. At least, not without Sedo's or Diana's help. It wasn't fair to depend on them, especially after remembering what Sedo confessed this morning. James, however, gently turned me in his arms to face him. I looked up at him, wondering what he was up to. Stay quiet? What are you doing? I had to ask. I trusted him, but I still wanted to know what he was thinking and planning. James continued to stare into my eyes before frowning softly.
I want to try and do something, but I'm not sure if it will work. It's been years since I've used pure demon magic, after all.
Oh? What did he mean? Was he going to cast some sort of spell on me? What kind of spell was he going to use? I stared at James, unsure of the whole thing, but James kissed my forehead.
Please, trust me, love.
It took a moment for me to slowly ease my curious nerves. James just wanted to help, and if this was the way, then this was the way. I nodded, giving him the okay to do whatever he needed to do. James gently ran his thumbs over the sides of my face, tracing over the edges of my eyes and cheekbones. I felt small wisps of energy dance over my nerves and closed my eyes gently, becoming lost in the sensation. I could faintly see golden light piercing through the darkness of my eyelids, so I kept my eyes closed, confident that it was the best thing to do. A warmth enveloped my head, filling my thoughts with pure calm and serenity. It felt almost too unreal. As the light faded away, I opened my eyes to meet the loving gaze of my incubus. He gently caressed my cheeks and placed his forehead against mine, closing his eyes with a smile. I felt joy wash over me as he held my head close to him.
There. That should work.
Aw, they're so cute. This is what I need. I need more James. What did you do?
A small mind barrier spell. It's been a long time since I've used a spell like that. Simple, but hopefully effective.
I nodded before gently nuzzling James. It had to work. It absolutely had to work. My heart swelled in hope that everything would be okay. Just go to sleep, hug him, kiss him before sleeping. Why not? I gently stretched up and kissed him softly on the lips. He gently kissed me back and held my head to him, pressing me to his chest lovingly. I could feel him sneak a bit of energy from me, but I didn't mind. As we both laid back in bed to sleep that night, James's spell was tested. Floating in the darkness, a dream was never the same every time. Sometimes I'd be floating in water. Other times I would be flying through air. The experience over my nerves changed every time, and I could never prepare myself for what dream or nightmare would come. That night, however, I found myself once again in a jail cell. Oh no. Oh boy, back to that, huh? Let me save again. I'm worried. Huh? I didn't understand. Why was I here again? Why was I once again trapped in a cell? I looked down at my body to see my regular clothes still on. There was no shackle attached to my ankle, and I was as free as I could be. That was different. Still, I had to be on guard. I quickly stood and walked up to the cell door, running my hands over the metal. At the mere touch of my hands, the door slowly swung open, releasing me and allowing me to leave its dark cage. Another difference. I stepped forward, looking up and down the hall I was in. There were no screams, no cries. It was as silent as the grave. That worried me and made me feel uneasy, despite the relief I felt that the dream was not the same as the nightmare I had before. At least, that's what I had hoped. Uh-oh. A sudden cry of pain echoed down the hall, causing me to look over in the direction it erupted from. My heart stopped for a moment, recognizing the voice. James? My body rushed on its own towards his voice, now desperate to find him. Why was he in pain? Who was hurting him? At last, I arrived at a door, barely open a crack. I peeked in and gasped at what I saw. Oh no! Chained to the far wall was James, his body twitching in pain as he desperately attempted to free himself. I stared in shock as my eyes took in a cross burnt onto his chest that seemed to sizzle over his flesh. No, what the hell?
Never.
Ooh. At James's reply to the voice, the mark on his chest began to glow a hot red and yellow color, burning further into his skin. I unconsciously ran my hand over my chest in sympathy, wincing at the sight. Bust in? Of course I'm gonna bust in. I'm gonna save my man. I needed to stop whatever this was. Dream or not, James was in pain. I threw the door open and rushed in, revealing everything in the room. However, the only person in it was James himself, who was now staring at me wide-eyed in fear. James!
Stay back! Ah!
Oh, God. The mark began to burn brighter on his skin, ushering me to rush forward and pull on his bonds to set him free. The steel bonds held fast against the wall, not moving an inch.
I would rather burn than let you touch her!
Oh, crap. I stared at James wide-eyed. Was he doing this to protect me? Was this happening because of the protection spell he cast on me? I didn't get a chance to think on it long, however. A bright flash of light erupted from James's body and I shut my eyes, blinded by the sight. James! My eyes refused to open until I felt myself awaken. I shot up in bed, gasping and clutching my chest. My heart pounded inside of my ribs at a frightening pace as I recalled images from the dream. Despite it not ending with me being attacked, it ended with James getting hurt. As I thought of James, I quickly looked over to see him still fast asleep. Luckily, I didn't scream to wake him this time, so I felt relieved that he wasn't ripped from his own rest. My heartbeat began to slow as I silently took a deep breath and let it out. It was a dream. I ran my palms over my eyes and rubbed them gently, calming down at last. I had to get through this. I had to keep my sanity about me. Yet, something in my gut wouldn't let me let this dream go. Something inside of me ushered me to keep thinking about it, as if I was missing something. Was I overlooking something important? How could that have been? I shook my head and slowly laid back down, curling up against James and closing my eyes again. I had to rest. I had to let it go for now. I would figure this out later. Darkness greeted me again, and I was safe until the morning. Yeesh, that was rough, bruh. That was not pleasant at all. Poor guy. I woke up in James's arms once more, slowly blinking the sleep from my eyes as my vision focused on his chest. As I stared, I vaguely pictured the cross burn over his skin, but was relieved to find no such thing there in reality. It had been just a dream. I looked up to see James smiling down at me softly before he kissed my forehead.
Good morning. Did you have a good rest?
I remembered the nightmare and suddenly became unsure of whether or not the truth was something he wanted to hear. I did rest, but I did wake up from that nightmare during the night. Was it worth telling him? Girl, this is the second time. I feel like, come on, you gotta trust your man and not, keep things from him. It's probably very important that you tell him what's going on, you know? So, of course I'm gonna tell him. I slept well. I had a nightmare again. I couldn't lie. I shook my head and the smile on James's face disappeared. As much as it would make him happy, it was better to let him know the results of his spell. I wasn't attacked by angels or anything, but you were.
I was.
I ran my hand over his chest, imagining the burn from the dream emblazoned on his skin. You were bolted to a wall and had a cross cut into your chest. It was burning, and you were arguing with a voice in the air.
A cross. So it was an angel's work.
Why, though? James closed his eyes and thought, trying to figure out why himself. But as he opened his eyes to look at me, his smile did not return.
The spell I cast to protect you placed an image of me in your mind, like a guardian. If they came, my spell would have forced them to attack me instead. Luckily, it worked.
Oh. James ran his hand over my cheek.
However, you still went through a nightmare, and for that I am sorry.
No, don't be. You protected me. So the dream was part of his spell. I felt relieved that it worked. The side effect was an image of James being hurt. At least it wasn't actually him. I ran my hand over James's cheek, smiling softly. Thank you. At last, James's smile reappeared before he softly took my hand and kissed my palm.
All for you, love.
Aww. A knock on the door, however, interrupted our moment together. Stop interrupting! We just want to have fluffy times, man. Leave us alone. I'm just kidding. I know we have a war coming, so we have other things to do.
Who is it?
Diana, I have food for you both.
Alright. What's up, Diana, girl? How you doing? Want me to touch your horns again? I'm just kidding. I can't help it. Now every time I'm going to flash back to that because that was funny. I looked to the door as James called out for her to enter. The door opened to reveal Diana with 2 plates of food, the same meal we had the day prior. She walked over and handed the plates to us before stepping back.
I assume that you both had a good rest.
Yes, actually. We've worked out the angel problem for now.
Diana raised her eyebrow, crossing her arms, but nodded in reply. Looking at Diana, however, I could see small dark circles beneath her eyes. Did she not rest last night? Leave her alone, question it. I'm curious. Okay? Diana, are you okay? You look worn out. Diana stared at me for a moment before shaking her head.
I didn't get much rest. I spent most of the night dealing with some uninvited guests.
Oh dear.
Should we be worried?
No, I have everything under control.
A part of me didn't believe her, but I nodded regardless. She didn't wish to talk about it. Then it was better not to ask about it any further. Diana turned on her heel and began to walk out of the room, but she stopped at the archway and looked back to me.
If any angels come your way again, tell me.
With that foreboding warning, Diana left, leaving James and I unable to reply. What could we say to that? James had already placed a spell on me to protect me, and he seemed to be just fine. We would be fine. Are you sure about that, girl? I don't know. James and I ate our food before separating to train. As soon as I arrived at the library to train, I stopped when I heard Diana's voice erupt from it.
Where is the flower?
I believe you were already informed as to what happened to it.
Do not tell me you are blind to its significance.
I peeked into the room, confused as to what was going on. Diana, with a face full of irritated anger, leaned against the mantel of the fireplace as Shadow pored over his scrolls, as he usually did. He didn't even look at Diana as he spoke, disinterested in the topic of conversation.
It wasn't needed for the gate spell, so it was deemed unnecessary. It was tossed out as a result of that judgment.
You do realize that flower is one of very few out there in this plane, correct?
And this should bother me. Why?
I could practically cut through the tension in the air with a knife. The way they spoke to each other spoke volumes of their disdain for one another. Why was that the case, though? They were working for the same cause. Diana almost snarled, which surprised me.
It should bother you, because as consequence of your thoughtless action, I am putting your scouts in charge of finding another.
And why would I allow this?
I watched as dark purple, ooh, she looks cool like that, as dark purple and black flames slowly emanated from Diana's body, causing Shadow to look over, straighten up, and take in the sight.
Because while you are their commanding officer, I am the head of this entire rebellion, and my orders outrank yours.
Diana glared hard at Shadow, but I could feel the intensity of her glare from the doorway, making a hard shiver run up my spine. Where did this Diana come from? I recognized her tone, but didn't want to imagine that this was the real her. As Shadow finally sighed, the tension died a bit.
As you wish. Another will be found without delay.
Yeah, why did you throw away a flower if it's that useful? Diana's aura faded as she let out a sigh, calming down from her angry display. Something was wrong with how Diana presented herself. Still, she altered her tone.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Shadow only stared coldly at Diana as she pushed herself away from the fireplace and walked towards the door. Panicked to be found out for eavesdropping, I stepped out of my hiding spot as if I had just arrived, looking into the room. Diana stopped at the sight of me, but closed her eyes and continued walking, arcing around me to get by.
Excuse me.
She's such a main character in this game. It's really interesting because I'm not even playing her route, but seeing her so often makes me more curious about her, makes me want to play her route more. So that's pretty cool, huh? I watched as Diana left before walking into the library, now concerned.
You know, you are a terrible spy.
You knew she was there. Huh? I looked at Shadow, realizing he knew that I had been listening in to what had happened, and grimaced. Crap. I rubbed the back of my head, trying to calm myself of the embarrassed nerves racing in my head. Sorry, I was curious about what was happening.
It's nothing to be concerned with, just a waste of time, really. I expect you not to do that again. Do you understand?
Press the question. No, just say yes, sir. We'll try to get along for now. It was better not to question it for now. I would learn eventually, but if Shadow wasn't going to tell me now, there was no way I'd be able to force an answer out. Shadow looked to me, observing me for a moment, before nodding and turning from the table.
Well then, shall we begin?
I nodded, prepared to face whatever he had in store for me. What took me off guard was someone coming up suddenly behind me and placing a knife at my throat. That girl? Is this part of the lesson? What?
Dead.
I froze. What did she mean? Shadow crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow.
Shama, a little too early.
As the person released me and moved the knife away from my throat, I turned with a hard glare to see the cloaked woman who had been talking to Diana before. She obediently looked to Shadow.
I apologize, sir.
Ah, are they a ship? I know I shouldn't, my first thing shouldn't be ship, you know? But I'm just wondering, because if he's not available, as a romantic interest for me, I just kind of feel like since Like, for example, the other Incubus boys already got paired off with their other wives, right? So I'm just wondering if everybody else has a partner in this game. Because we already saw Diana has Zero now. So I'm like, oh, everybody has somebody. Which is nice. I mean, why not? It's not realistic because there's many of us who are alone and who cry at night into their pillow. And they're so sad and lonely. Okay, I'm sorry.
Back to your place.
Shama bowed and quickly formed herself into a shadow, fading into the ground. I instinctively began to follow suit, but Shadow cleared his throat.
Pay no mind to that.
No, you can't just say that. What was that? I had a knife held to my throat without any warning. I was not prepared, and while that may have been some messed up point about war and not being prepared, Shadow was watching and could have stopped it. The only thing that ran through my mind was how my body suddenly became filled with adrenaline. Shadow stared blankly at the question, and at me.
A misfired trap. Shama is meant to surprise attack you after I teach you your next lesson. Obviously there was a miscalculation, but that'll be fixed and done properly after the lesson is given.
Oh boy. I understood, wanting to be ready the next time it happened, but something caught my attention, drawing my focus away from his words. As I stared at Shadow, I faintly noticed his hair swing slightly in the air on his head. What the? There was no wind in the room. How was it moving? I focused my attention on his hair, wondering what it was doing as Shadow raised an eyebrow at me.
What are you staring at?
I shook my head and avoided it. Why was I so focused on his hair? It was hair! But look at how... Okay, I didn't mention this before. Look at how his hair, the one that's right in front, that's down to his waist, it looks like a hand, like a claw, you know? And I noticed that before and I was like, oh, that's so cool. So the fact that she mentioned the hair right now is why I'm like, oh, let me mention it right now. As I thought that, however, his ponytail suddenly began to move, like a hand. See? Okay, I was right. Like a hand tapping its fingers on Shadow's shoulder and on his waist. Whoa! I jumped back, pointing at his hair and earning a smug smile from Shadow. Why is your hair doing that? As Shadow suddenly glared at me, I tensed up.
Are you more interested in the hair or in your training?
Both. Tell me. I kept my mouth shut. I wasn't going to get anywhere by getting distracted, just like with my curiosity with Diana. If this was another lesson, then Shadow was teaching me properly. Still, my curiosity pecked wildly at me, wanting me to desperately ask about it. I'm so curious, please. I don't want to keep holding back. Just ask. Shadow raised an eyebrow. Oh, controlling fear. Okay. I was fearful that he was going to dismiss me afterwards, but I desperately needed to know about the hair. It was just too interesting to ignore now. The ends of Shadow's hair gently moved up in the air, waving their fingers at me like they were dancing over piano keys.
Let me ask you this, human. What would you be willing to trade your soul for?
Whoa. My soul? I stared at Shadow, slightly dumbfounded. He traded his soul for his hair? Now that my focus was on it, the strands of his hair were pitch black. Not even light could pierce them or highlight the strands. How was that possible? Shadow lifted a hand up and ran his fingers over his front ponytail, combing through the darkness.
For me, the answer was simple. To control fear.
That made absolutely no sense. How does your hair make you control fear? Shadow gazed into my eyes before sighing and lowering his hand. However, as he did, his own shadow slowly rose behind him, as if it were a being itself, and stood silently. The shadow's hair, however, danced around him, revealing not 2, but at least 10 hands splaying from his head, waving through the air in snake-like movements. I felt frightened just staring. The shadow quickly detached itself from its master and began to sprint around the room, taking out every light source and completely covering the room in darkness. What the? It was pitch black in the room. Not even the light of the hallway could be seen. I couldn't spot Shadow or his shadow anywhere, causing me to stand still in utter fear. As hands began to crawl along my body and wrap around my arms and torso, I screamed and began to flail, feeling them completely coil around me like snakes. Soon, I was trapped in a tight embrace of Shadow.
To completely control darkness is to control fear. To control fear is to control life itself.
Really?
It isn't enough to simply hold that much power in two hands.
I get it! Let me go, please! I was frightened to the core. I didn't want to be in this anymore. I was excited about learning about dark magic, but this had quickly become a power I was fearful of. At last, the light reappeared in the room, and Shadow stood before me, arms crossed with a small smirk on his face. His two ponytails settled onto his body, resting from what they had done. As I no longer felt tied up, I shook out my arms and wrapped them around myself, trying to calm down.
Are there any more questions you intend to waste my time with?
But... Okay, whatever. I became fearful of this man. He was my trainer, but at the same time, he wasn't afraid to make me fear him. It may have just been darkness, but what if he pulled a knife on me like Shama did? I would have been killed in the cover of darkness without any way to fight back. I shook my head, letting out a shaky breath. No, sir. I had to pay attention. No more distractions. I had to focus on the task ahead, or else I would open myself for another unpleasant surprise. Sorry. I'll pay attention. Shadow nodded, rolling his shoulders and forming a pure black dagger in his hand. As he looked to me, I understood what he wanted me to do, having watched his hand carefully. He was not one to actually talk me through anything. I focused on my hand, trying to imagine a dagger forming within it. I rounded my hand to form a shadow across my palm, knowing that I needed the darkness to help give it shape. Slowly, but eventually, the hilt of a dagger formed in my hand, allowing me to grasp it. The blade quickly jutted out of the end, finally completing its formation, before I lowered it to my side and looked up at Shadow.
Become aware of your surroundings. Your opponent is using the shadow plane, so you're at a disadvantage. But you can still defend yourself, as long as you pay attention.
That was why my attention was so important. I mentally wanted to slap myself for letting my curiosity take hold of me. Now was not the time to mope, however. I had to focus. I nodded before looking around, trying to figure out how I was going to find Shama and defend myself before she got to me and killed me. I wasn't sure how shadows got around in the other plane, but I was going to find out. We are going to leave this episode right here, guys. I don't know how much longer the lesson is going to go, but this episode is going on long enough. So this is pretty interesting, seeing what's going on. A lot of complicated stuff going on with Diana, and I'm still very worried about James and the whole Angel situation. And this whole training with Shadow, it's like, how many games, or how many storylines and stuff can you squeeze into one game? So it's very interesting, and I wonder if there's going to be another game after this, like a third one. I haven't heard any rumors or anything, but I still have to wait and see how long this game is and what's going to happen. So anyway, I'm enjoying this. Hope you guys are too. So thank you for watching, and until next time, have a nice day. Bye!